Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 475 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. I'm Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have this small crew here this week. Crim couldn't make it, but I'm joined today by the owner of MTGGoldfish, Richard. How are you this fine Monday, Richard?
Good morning, Seth. Nothing like Monday morning after daylight savings. That's
Seriously. This weekend
I thought we were getting rid of it.
Short.
I thought we were getting rid of it. What happened?
Oh, I wish we would. I don't know. I thought we were going to get rid of it too, but we can't do anything. We can't agree on anything over here. Nothing ever gets done in the US. But we have a lot to talk about today. We have some really interesting topics. So we just got a huge BNR, well, I don't know if I want to say huge, but an impactful BNR announcement. So we want to talk about what went down with the BNR. There's been some stuff about competitive Magic, an interesting article from Reed Duke. We found out what criming is in Magic, a new, not really real dungeon. And then I want to talk a little bit about the state of written content in Magic and also the format of design these days. We've gotten to a lot of meme-ish designs in Magic, and I wanted your opinion on it before answering your Fishmail. So we're going to be bouncing all around today. Before we get to it, though, a reminder that today's show is brought to you by Card Conduit, and Card Conduit's the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. If you ever get tired of the hassles of buy listing, you can skip them with Card Conduit. With their curated service, you can send in as many cards as you want with a buy list value of $1 or more and pay just a 5% service fee. And if you want to do a bit of work, you can use the sorted service where you list and sort your cards in advance and pay just a 2% fee. And either way, you're going to get a detailed report with the results and a fast payment once your order is processed. And you can even get another 10% off by heading over to cardconduit.com/MTGGoldfish. Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. So thank you to Card Conduit for supporting this show. And let's talk some Magic, and let's start with the big news, the fresh news. Today's BNR announcement. Richard, what did WotC change in today's update?
All right, banned and restricted. We got modern and vintage on the table. So in modern, violent outburst is banned. And in vintage, ponder is unrestricted, even though the announcement says unbanned. They couldn't even bother getting the right status. So ponder and vintage and violent outburst in modern.
So ponder and vintage is the easy one because I have no idea what this actually means. If you read the actual announcement, they're kind of like, it's been restricted for a long time and blue combo decks aren't really that good right now, so might as well. I don't know. Do you play any vintage, Richard? Do you have an opinion on this unbanning?
I don't know.
Unrestriction, technically.
Well, I don't even remember being restricted in the first place. Ponder was so broken that it needed to be restricted at some point, but okay. Seems fine. I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure I was actually just talking to Joe Dyer, who does This Week in Legacy Vintage 101. I know he's working on an article for Wednesday, I believe, that's going to be all about the banning. So if you want the actual breakdown of the vintage stuff, tune in for that article on a Vintage 101. But modern, this is a pretty big change. Actually, one of the things I've been complaining the most about in modern, and I do love to complain about modern, Cascade, seriously, that mechanic. And this is actually very targeted at the Cascade deck. So as far as I can tell, if you don't know Violent Outburst, it's the instant speed 3-mana Cascade spell. It does pump your creatures, not usually very relevant. It's more just to Cascade into like Rhinos or Living End. And what we've seen in modern is since the last BNR, where we got rid of Fury and we got rid of Up a Beanstalk, Cascade decks have always been good, but they have really risen to the top of the meta. If you look at our metagame page, Crashing Footfalls, #1 deck in modern by a pretty big margin, up to almost 17% of the meta. And then the #2 deck is Living End. So on the metagame page, more than like a quarter of the decks in modern are these Cascade-driven decks. My question to you is, Richard, how much does this power down these decks? I feel like this isn't the kill shot, right? If Wizards wanted these decks to not exist, they like change the way the rules work with free spells or something like that. This feels like kind of the soft way to go about it, but what do you think? How bad does this hurt the Cascade decks in modern?
It's a significant blow. But they're not dead, right? But they're, Teamer Rhinos, arguably one of the best decks in the format, is probably now tier 1.5, tier 2 or something. Like, okay, you laughed at Violent Outburst. The text is real, okay? The +1/+0 is a very real thing in modern. with 2 rhinos, that's like a shock coming in, right? Or if you have like 3 creatures or whatever, like it actually is a thing. It's not just dead text on the card. But the more important thing is instant speed is stupid, right? Because you can use
Yes.
Force of Negation to back up your plays. You can ninja in blockers, right? There are many times where I have a Goif and I'm like, do I attack into the double rhinos coming in? Do I have instant speed removal? And sometimes you choose not to, right? So just the threat of that. The fact that Living End can Wrath at instant speed is quite dumb, right? They just cascade into the Living
Yep.
End. Or you just like tie up mana, right? Like doing things at instant speed is very powerful. So I think this is a huge blow to the deck, but the deck is still quite playable. Because, there are many times where you just die to Shardless Agent and Violent Outburst is not a thing, right? So the deck still has good draws, but I think this is the perfect tuning down of Cascade decks. It knocks them down a peg while not making them like totally scuffed. And you don't have to go that far to fix the deck, right? You either add Ardent Plea or Demonic Dread for the Cascade, and then as a bonus, you can play Teferi now with your mana, I guess, which gives you that pseudo Force of Negation protection. And I guess it pitches the Force of Negation too. But yeah, so I think this is a very good change for Modern. It's nothing dramatic, but I think it will be very impactful.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about directly is part of why this banning is impactful is one of the tricks that both Living End and Crashing Footfalls can do with Violent Outbursts is since you use it on your opponent's turn, it turns on your free casting of Force of Negation, so you actually have that protection built in. So that's another way that this just powers it down. Like adding 10 power to the battlefield or 8 power on turn 3, that's going to be strong. Whether it's instant speed or sorcery speed, Living End has been a deck in Modern for a decade now. Like Graveyard Hate comes and goes, bannings, erratas come and go, and the deck always exists. So I have pretty high confidence that both of these decks, they probably won't be the best deck in the meta anymore, but I'm pretty sure they're going to exist still. And I think that's almost the perfect way to ban cards in Modern, because Modern decks are really expensive, and they could do something more severe, like, okay, you can't cascade into no mana value spells, or some errata of how it works, or like straight up banning, Crashing Footfalls or Living End. That would just really kill those decks. If you're someone who spent $1,000 on a Crashing Footfall deck or almost that much on a Living End deck, that would be really brutal. This, I think, is the best way to handle it because, yeah, your deck's not going to be quite as good, but your deck was probably a little bit too good to begin with, but your cards are still going to have value. You can still go to your F&M and play it or play it on Magic Online. So I really like how they handled this banning. Is there anything else, Richard? You play a lot of Modern that should have changed? Anything we're missing from this one, you think?
And this is all irrelevant because Modern Horizons 3 coming out.
Yeah.
like the whole format is going to do a rotation, so it's possible that no one cares about Violent Outbursts because Modern Horizons 3 has some like crazy Thalia or some crazy Grand Abolisher creature in it, or maybe they printed another Violent Outburst to just they made a 3 mana instant speed discover card or something, right? Who knows? So we don't know what's going on in Modern Horizons 3. So we gotta withhold judgment because the meta will definitely shift with the new set coming out. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Just
I
we're not
will
gonna get by an
say,
outburst in the meantime, right?
I will say, I would like to see more unbanning still. That's something I think they could do more aggressively. So far, we've had good luck. I think adding Preordain was pretty harmless and a positive to the format. Stoneforge worked out, Jace worked out. So I hope they do that at some point. Maybe you don't need to do it now because Modern Horizons 3 is coming out in a few months anyway and going to shake everything up. But I do hope that's on WotC's list. I think really the biggest missing thing for me is actually Pioneer. I was very surprised when they announced that there would be a BNR today. My initial thought was, okay, they're going to change something in Pioneer. We just had a pro tour. We got a bunch of data from it. No changes to Pioneer at all. And if you actually read the article, they sound pretty happy with the state of Pioneer. So I was thinking maybe the Amelia combo might get targeted. It drew a lot of games on camera during the top 8, which was kind of awkward. And it's a turn 3 win deck when it hits its best draws. And it has a pretty good win rate from what we've seen. I also thought Phoenix, that's a deck a lot of people have talked about. Even though Vampires won the last Pro Tour, if you just look at win rates, especially when you consider it was the most played deck and how many people were on it, Is It Phoenix performed incredibly well and has been on Magic Online as well, where it's just really risen to the top of the meta super quickly. So I was thinking maybe they target like treasure cruise or something, but we ended up with a no changes Pioneer announcement, which I was really surprised about because WotC had just said like, oh, we're going to be more aggressive with like maintaining Pioneer, changing things. So not that Pioneer's horrible right now, but I was expecting at least a couple of tweaks around the edges in Pioneer.
They got a new deck. They got they got a new deck. They got in the news. It was vampires. Format's fine. like
Oh, yeah.
if you can still innovate new decks, how bad could the format be, right? So I think they're happy with it. But maybe they'll change their tune, you know, a couple sets down the line if it looks exactly the same.
I mean, remember, there's no Modern Horizons 3 for Pioneer, so sooner or later they might have to shake things up. But I don't think Pioneer's in a horrible place right now. So no changes. I found it surprising, but it's not the end of the world. Like, remember when they didn't ban Fury when everyone knew they had to ban Fury? It's not one of those situations where I think everyone's going to be up in arms. But it was a bit of a
It did
surprise.
nothing, by the way. Heads up. Scam is
Banning
still a
Fury?
very strong deck. Yeah, nobody is playing X1s. So the Fury ban was effectively a nothing burger to the metagame.
Yeah, it turns out that Grief is the card they scam you with. So
Well,
if
turns
you
out
wanna actually end
Bowmaster
that
still
place-
exists. It does the same
Yeah.
job, and your X1s suck anyway, so it didn't matter.
Anyway, that's the PNR announcement. So interested to see what all of you think. If you got any thoughts on these changes, what else should have changed, definitely let us know in the comments. Let's talk a little bit about what's next on our list. Oh yeah, I want to ask you, there was this article from Reed Duke this week, which I thought was really interesting. So it's titled why you should care about competitive MTG. It's not just for Spike. So this is an article from one of Magic's best known pros about why casual players should care about Magic, competitive Magic, like the Pro Tour. Richard, did you happen to see this article? I'm curious what you think of it. Like, should we care if we're not pro players about competitive Magic in 2024?
I didn't read the article, but it sounds funny. Like, you know, you should care about me, even though I'm not related to you at all, like kind of deal, right? Like, it seems funny. What is the actual crux of the argument, Seth, as to why I, as a non-competitive player, should care about the competitive scene?
Okay, so the article starts off with one of the funnier things. It started off with essentially like, if you don't think competitive Magic matters, we managed to like make Vein Ripper go up 10 times in price at the last Pro Tour. I was like, oh no, Reed, if you're trying to win over casuals, the last thing you want to do is like, hey, Pro Magic makes cards more expensive. You're gonna love it. Because that is like, oh, casuals hate cards going up. But the overall argument was pretty much that competitive Magic and casual Magic aren't at odds. They actually like work well together. If it wasn't for competitive Magic, we wouldn't even have Commander most likely, because that was birthed out of, back rooms of pro tours and judges, and that even if you're a casual player, you probably want to get better at the game. Like, I think the example he used was, you probably don't like getting mana screwed. Well, if you actually care about, good players playing pro Magic and read their articles and watch pro tours, we'll show you how to not get mana screwed as much. We'll help you build a better mana base. So you're going to have more fun playing your casual Commander games because you'll, not get mana screwed as often. And then also, like, it's really cool. Like, we got to see Kai Booty come out of retirement, and there's all these great storylines in just the last year of the Pro Tour. It's like a great TV show that, is just entertaining to watch, even if you don't really care about it. Just like, you'll get enjoyment out of keeping up with the storylines of Pro Magic, essentially. So those were kind of the three main points, I think. Like, it's fun to watch. It'll make you a better player, even in your casual games. And yeah, it makes card prices go up.
Was this sponsored by the Pro Tour or something? This seems like. Sorry, Reed.
No?
It feels very boomerish. This is the most Tarmogoyf article I've ever read. So I will say, I do think competitive Magic is important. But I think the arguments laid out here are kind of weird. Like, you should care about this whole thing to make your casual games better, when literally the whole point of casual is like, you don't care. Right? Like, the whole point is you don't want to get sweaty about it and you're playing for fun. But The funny thing is when I play other card games, namely One Piece, it's all full of like sweaty people who like ran away from Magic because they want to play like sweaty Magic, right? They want to like get good, they want to learn the in and outs of matchups, and they want to play in a, like a tournament scene, and kind of Magic has pushed those people away. But the funny thing is, right? Like a Magic Grand Prix or Pro Tour is huge, right? Like the competitive 60 card, even though we lament about Commander stuff like that, compared to like literally every other game, it's like magnitudes bigger. But people still praise like Flesh and Blood or One Piece or whatever for like the competitive scene. But it's only because of narrative, right? It's only because that's the only thing people talk about in those worlds. So it seems like a big deal. Whereas, you just had a multi-thousand person event or whatever, but we're still talking about Commander precons. It feels like you're kind of pushed
Yeah.
aside, even though there's much more competition and much more gameplay, whatever happening. So I think the narrative is what pushes people away. And there is a demand for this competition, right? And the demand
Yeah.
for getting a feature match, getting, the demand for SCG writing, the deck tech on your secret, like two of Miser card and Rhinos that you've innovated, like all of these things like Magic players strive for. And it's kind of been thrown out the window the past maybe 5 years or so. So I do see a point to that. And really Magic players have just looked to other games. Right? Like
Yeah.
anything that looks like competition focused, they're like, oh, yes, I can do that. And it's even worse because you go into those games with a leg up on everyone else, and then you feel really good about like beating them because you've played like 15 years of Magic, right? So you're like, why would I go back to this game where like everyone is like, better than me, and like no one cares about me, and everything is a commander spoiler. I can play this new game. I'm on the ground. I'm first and I'm early. Imagine being in beta, being in at beta or whatever for Magic, right? While you're just destroying the competition because you have so much experience. So I don't know. We
So you
need
just
more
get to stomp on
competition.
some noobs, basically, pretty much.
Yeah, you get to feel good about
uh,
your choices and your deep card game theory.
it it does carry over. It does carry over quite a bit. I will say, like, I also think competitive Magic matters, and I feel like a lot of this, though, like, it comes back to me as being on Wizards for like the changes that have been made to the Pro Tour and the GPs and the whole qualifying system. Like the one big point about like, hey, it's fun to watch. It's like a great TV show. You get to see like, Kai Booty and Nathan Sauer and like all these people doing cool things in these great storylines. I remember that feeling from like a decade ago when we had GPs every weekend and you could see like, oh, someone's like won a few weeks in a row. Where are they on like the leaderboard? Are they going to qualify for the next Pro Tour? But now when it's like a Pro Tour every like 3 or 4 months, a couple a year, and like 3 a year, I think this year, and nothing else like really on coverage, it's a lot harder to do that, right? I think what makes the TV show aspect work is they put an episode up every week and it keeps you coming back. But when it's like, hey, here's this one Pro Tour that's overshadowed by a Magic Con and endless spoilers for like the next 3 sets anyway, we'll do another one in 4 months. Like, that's really hard to get anyone engaged in those storylines. So I wish that Wizards would do a better job publicizing some of this stuff. Like, some of this stuff is, I follow Magic and Pro Magic more than most people. And like, I hadn't really considered that Seth Mansfield won his 4th Pro Tour, which puts him in the conversation for being like one of the best players of all time. Like, stuff like that just isn't broadcast. Like, that should be focused on. It almost wraps around a little bit. It's so funny to stuff we talked about like in the early 2010s when like I remember SCG and Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan being really big about star building. We need to like get these players out there and get their stories out there. And SCG did such a good job of that. I think we need a little bit more of that. Like there are some great storylines, but I don't even know how a casual fan is going to find those stories because no one's telling them.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just need space for competitive to breathe. Like, I think we
Yeah.
actually have the enough events, right? Like the Pro Tour Worlds, like that's good enough. But don't put it with the MagicCon. Don't release like 80 new sets worth of previews like the same weekend. Like, who has time to process that? Like, vampires is a big deal. Like that is the same as like, remember the Eldrazi deck from Modern or whatever? And we talked about that for weeks and weeks and whatever. Like, we
Yeah.
talked about vampires for like 3 minutes. And then we were on to like Bloomborough and Oko in a cowboy hat or something. And we got Fallout to play and Modern Horizons 3 happening. Like, There's just no time to breathe, right? Like we do have the stories, we do have the events, but they're being overshadowed by game nights being broadcast next door, right? And
Yeah.
you can't play your game of competitive Magic. They're being overshadowed by all these things happening. So if you just put the Pro Tour and gave it its own like 2-week period, right, or 3-week period where you didn't put everything else with it, that might be enough. That might be enough.
Or even like a weekend. Remember like the Mythic Invitational where that just like took center stage for 3 days and that was the focus of the whole thing. You could even just do that. Like I don't know if Wizards is going to shut down spoilers for 3 weeks to make a Pro Tour work, but they could certainly like shut down a weekend and get the pros together and like make that weekend all about this event and the stories of that event. So I think you're right on that end. I will say I wish GPs would come back. I like partly agree that we have more events than we used to, but I still feel like one of the complaints you see from players is just like qualifying's not easy. The system's kind of still like confusing. There's not as many opportunities as they used to be. So I still think the system can be improved to some extent, but I think you're right that the biggest problem is it's just overshadowed. I was at MagicCon Chicago. Game Nights Live is like packed out. People were getting seats like 2 hours early because they didn't think they'd get a seat for Game Nights Live. The lines are just like out the door. And then the Pro Tour, you have like a couple people kind of standing by the rail. And it's just not like
Yeah.
promoted in the same way. Like it's not even similar. So yeah, I think there's a lot Wizards could do on that end to make it more of a big event. Speaking of this article, it kind of reminded me of something else that happened recently. So Card Market, who crushes it on YouTube, actually just posted an article this morning essentially about the end of their written content. They had a site called Card Market Insights where they post written articles. There's still going to be some from like their owner or manager, I think, on occasion, and some things like that. But as far as written content, they're basically getting out of it. And it's a world of video content at this point, and the people just don't want the written content. At the same time, Channel Fireball just went back to, in the past week, posting all their articles for free for everyone after they've been paywalled for a couple years and are trying to promote their articles again. What do you think of the state of written content in Magic, Richard? I remember when I started, that's all I did. I wrote articles and blog posts, didn't make any videos, and slowly over the course of the years, it's kind of shifted to now, outside of like articles to put a video in, I very rarely write articles. And if I'm going to like do that, it's going to be a video on YouTube. What do you think about the state of written content?
Uh, this is not unique to Magic. This is the internet being ruined. Like, I don't know if you ever try to look for literally any piece of information on the internet. You're like, how do I like open this thing? And then you need to watch like a 20-minute video when literally like 3 sentences, like look for the button here, press it, you're done, right? Like
Yep.
everything is a video now. I don't know why. I think people can't read. It has to be something to do with Google, even though Google owns both YouTube and Google itself. Like, for some reason, people feel the need to make videos because it either makes them more money or is easier to find. But it doesn't make any sense. Like, just literally anything. I want to find a recipe, gotta watch a video. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. Just give me the
Yeah.
list,
Give
right?
me the list.
You know what's really bad though? Like, we don't do this, but like One Piece content, my goodness, you're like, I want a deck. You search a deck, it's a YouTube video. Nowhere in that video is the deck list like typed out. Like there's not a
Ouch.
link to a
Oh,
website. It's not in text
oh.
in the description. And you have to like watch through and flip through to get the cards. And you're like, this is like,
Wait.
what is going on here? But
So is One
that
Piece,
is all
are
content.
they just bad at content, or is that on purpose to force people to watch the video?
I think it's for the force people to watch the video in the same way
Ugh.
that for me to get my 3 lines of information, I need to watch a 5-minute YouTube video with, the 3-minute ad in there just for the kicker, right? That's just
I don't know that,
this
like,
generation. That's how it works.
maybe it'll shift back. Like if it goes too far, because I hear your complaint and I agree with it. Like sometimes I just need those 3 sentences and don't want to watch a 20-minute video. If enough people feel like that, will the 3 sentences come back eventually? Could we ever see written content come back? Or is it just like his technology advanced so far? Everyone's got a phone. You can make a video very easily. We'll see TikTok or shorts or reels or whatever. Like, are we moving past written content on the internet altogether?
We're moving to AI. We're moving, like Chat GPT is probably the real way to get it now, where I don't know if you've noticed. So I don't know if you actually do this, but like ChatGPT has replaced my Googling for a lot
Ooh,
because I Google stuff and like half the time it's like freaking YouTube videos and the other half the time it's like irrelevant old stuff. But ChatGPT gives me an answer that's like kind of correct, like 80% of the time and like
correct enough,
close
yeah.
enough. So I think it's some weird alternate. I don't think we're going back to like Reddit posts or whatever for information. Like I guess Reddit's like the last place where you find written information, right? But we don't have forums anymore. You have like Reddit, Quora. That's it. Like most media is made on TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, all that stuff, right?
That's
So
true. Although, what's the paywalled article site that a lot of people go to?
Medium.
Medium? Is that
Medium.
Medium? I read some Medium stuff on occasion. Like once in a while, I still read like articles, but I definitely watch way more videos. Like 10
You can
years ago,
also
I read all articles,
you can
but
also get a Wall Street Journal in paper somewhere, Seth. But
is Medium
that,
just
that, that
boomer internet? Yeah.
yeah, you're like that guy on the airplane, right? Like, like has like one newspaper. That's it.
All
Like,
right,
yeah.
let me ask you this then. Like, does this hurt the game in any way? Because this kind of reminds me of like what Reed Duke was saying in his article, where Reed Duke is like, you should want to learn about the game and you can get better by watching pros. And if you read the card market article, one of the conclusions I thought was really interesting is it says all of the analysis suggests that nowadays people are more interested in said fun over said teachings, more interested in experiencing the game than learning about it, and more interested in watching it than reading it. None of this is bad per se, but all of which is bad news for the written word. Uh, I think that's very true, but it's kind of funny to see Reed Duke in a written article arguing, to learn more about the game and improve that experience. Do Magic players even want that? Like, or is card market kind of right that we just don't care about that anymore? We don't want an in-depth article. I've seen, remember people would write like 100-page sideboard guide going over every intricacies of a deck in the matchup, and people would read it with those super in-depth teaching articles. But that's just not a thing anymore. Now it's a card market video or a goldfish video where people, doing something fun and entertaining. Does it hurt the game overall that we're like losing? Like, I don't think Who's the Beatdown would be written today. It wouldn't be. It would be like some meme video, which would get a bunch of views, but that piece of Magic history would just not exist.
Yes. Everyone is dumber today. I mean, we have a joke when we make content. We're like, oh, this is too educational, right? And then the way, if we want to actually have some information, we got to do it like medicine, where you wrap like the medicine inside a donut or something, and then give someone the donut, and then like maybe they'll take the medicine at that, or you flavor it with like disgusting sugary flavors or whatever, right? Like it's true, and I think it's bad. Like short term it makes sense, right? Like it's much easier to get views from casual people, but I don't know, like someone has to give me the real numbers of like how much money casuals give versus like enfranchised players, right? And per person
Yeah.
enfranchised player probably gives a lot more, but there's a lot more casual players, so in bulk it makes up for it. But there's got to be some market where you can just get enough enfranchised players, because they will stay with you no matter what, right? They will stay with you through Eldrazi Winter, through Oko and Hogak and whatever. I feel we're losing that, right? Because right now, the minute any format is boring, I just go play a different game, right? Like we don't have that
Yeah.
same level of investment where like I've actually spent like $60,000 and like 60,000 hours learning about this, so I can't just throw it away. It's like it's the daily questing, right? Where you've invested so much time, and then you're like, I can't walk away from an MMO, sunk costs, right? Like we don't have that anymore, so that's a problem, right? Like,
And I think that even plays into the releases from Wizards, because we've talked about this before, but it used to be with, 4 sets of years and maybe, one run of Commander Precons or whatever. Wizards kind of trained us to care about every single product, and then they decided to like switch to a different model where the goal was to put out a bunch of products so every niche would have its desires fulfilled. And they kind of straight up told us like, don't care about all the products anymore. So we kind of see that happening even with the product releases, where it's like, we don't want you to be that enfranchised. Please be less enfranchised. We would prefer you not to care about every set that we make, which is just such a huge shift. So I think Wizards is even going after that casual market in the same way that we're talking about with like competitive play and all this other stuff.
And I
So they
say all
never go
this, and
back.
we don't do it at all, right? We we are
Oh,
I'm in total agreement with card market. We don't make written content. We don't try to teach
yeah,
people things. We try to have fun. We try to appeal to the masses, and that's just the way society is going, right? So I think Wizards
yeah.
is correct in this trend. It's a shame. It's cool to like meet people and talk about mulligan decisions. Like, remember the old content where it's like someone plays a fetch land and fetches a duel? What deck are they? You're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yep.
yes, those percentages, baby. Right? You wouldn't have that conversation today. Right? You're like,
No.
I don't know. Am I dead? Like, what'd you do? Right? But when you're that in franchising, you can meet people that in franchising. You can have like deep conversations about what deck people are playing and stuff like that. That's cool, and I think that's kind of gone. But that's like, I don't know, that's kind of gone with society today, right? With social media and things like that. Remember when
Yeah.
like everyone watched the same thing, like the OJ Simpson trial, or like Friends
Yep.
or whatever? Like today, everyone watches different things. Like even the most popular thing, like, is not consumed by the whole of America, right? Or the whole of your city, or the whole of your friend group, or whatever, right? It's like everyone's fragmented, doing their own things. So it's just a function of the times, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, not to get too real world, but I think that plays into how divided everyone is too. There used to be way more shared experiences that everyone in, the culture would have. And we just don't really have that anymore. Be it in Magic, is like, the more we talk about this stuff, the more the Magic world and community just seems like a micro version of like society at large. But I don't think we have those shared experiences anymore. It's way more fractured and fragmented, which is good in the sense that you can find the exact thing that appeals to you the most. If you want to watch like, whatever, a gladiator video or a pre-modern video, you can find like whatever niche you want. But at the same time, you're not going to have that shared experience with the rest of the community. So yeah, it's definitely a changing world as far as Magic content. Anyway, let's keep moving forward. Did you see Baldur's Gate Wilderness, Richard? So earlier this week, there was a little bit of controversy because WotC spoiled this new dungeon that's like the biggest dungeon of all time. And it's for a promotional event that they're doing to sell more Baldur's Gate packs and also celebrate 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. But they spoiled this dungeon, but they didn't really make it clear if it was legal or not. And then people asked Matt Tabak, who was the rules manager at WotC, and he was like, I haven't even heard about this. I didn't know it was a thing. I'll look into it. We're like, oh God. It turns out it is not officially real. My question for you, Richard, would you let someone rule zero this into your commander game? If someone's got a dungeon deck and hey, I want to play Baldur's Gate Wilderness, are you a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Because I think I'm honestly a thumbs down. This card, that's a lot of
Really?
text, and I think it's probably busted.
So
That's so much
I actually
text.
really like this card. So I don't even know what the event came out of, but this is Baldur's Gate 3 right here. Right? So like,
Yeah.
I recognize the name of every single room and the abilities. I'm like, oh, this is hot. This should have happened with the original set. Is it unbalanced? It doesn't seem. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem
I
that
mean,
good. I mean, can you read this? Like, you gotta print a poster? Like, there's
no,
no way you can
not
print this on like
really.
a normal card size, right? It has to be like at least a letter sized piece of paper. But I
Yeah.
don't know. I think it's fine. It doesn't seem
Eh.
broken or anything. In fact, it's probably better, right? Like the real dungeons are broken, like this one.
I mean, the flavor of it is cool, and it is probably there were so many misses with the Baldur's Gate set. It's really wild to me. I feel like if the timing of this set was lined up better, this would have went down as one of the best sets of the last like 5 or 10 years. But like the timing didn't line up with Baldur's Gate, the video game, and then you didn't have like this Baldur's Gate dungeon, and then Arena had different versions of stuff, which was really weird to everyone. So there's so many misses that kept that from being like the home run it should have been. The dungeon itself, I guess it's cool. I guess I worry about the repeatable wrath on the bottom and the emblems. Like, I don't know. I've seen some
How's it
commander decks that
repeatable? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You got to go through this things 8
are.
times.
Once you get turboing through those dungeons, though, some decks
But
can do it
if
really
you have the
efficiently.
engine, isn't it much worse to be going through like what is it, the 5 card dungeons or whatever? Like, I played
Yeah.
a dungeon deck before. You can churn through the dungeons really fast, and they are the win con. And the shorter ones are you just do it faster. So I actually think this makes it harder for you as opposed to
Just because
making
it's
it
too
easier.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It is too big. Someone also mentioned, and I don't. It's so hard because we don't have official rules because this isn't a legal card that the rules managers didn't even know about. Someone mentioned there's no door at the bottom, so they weren't sure if you could go back through it. I imagine you have to,
Wait,
though. I
is there
think that's
normally a
probably just
door? Wow.
I know, like, you see at the top, there's like a door. Normally, there's another one of those at the bottom. I don't know. It's over my head, but there's an event coming up for that. You can go to your LGS and play like Baldur's Gate with this cool dungeon in a special format. So if you're interested, that's coming up in June, I think. We also found out a little more about Outlaws at Thunder Junction with the reminder text of committing a crime. So Mark Rosewater posted this on his blog so committing a crime is one of the mechanics we know is coming in Outlaws. And here's the text on it. You commit a crime when you target opponents, anything your opponents control, or cards in your opponent's graveyard. If you do any of those things, it's a crime. I'm curious, Richard, we haven't seen many cards from this set, so we can't go too in depth on like, breaking down the power of specific cards. What do you think of the power of this mechanic? Like, is this abusable in some way? Is this even like a good mechanic? What do you think? First impressions.
This is the dumbest mechanic I've ever heard. Like, so mechanically it's fine, but why would you put like a negative meaning onto a game mechanic? So committing a crime, like nobody is gonna be like, oh, that's a good thing, right? In
Yeah.
general, that's a bad thing. And then now you just stuck it on literally a core gameplay mechanic. Like people already complain about stuff they shouldn't complain about. Now they're gonna complain because it's a crime, right? It's like putting like drugs into your game or something. Remember Halo or whatever? You're like,
Yes.
why would you do this? Like, why would you just associate your game with like negative things for like no reason? So I don't know why this is the case. The joke is now secret rendezvous is now a crime. Wedding ring is now a crime. Like
Yeah.
all of these things that
The
target becomes
flavor.
a crime. But I just don't like the
Yeah.
fact that it's a very negative thing. And I'm surprised they did this because they, in the early days of Magic, it's like white good, black bad, right? Like it was very clear the way they did that. But now they've changed it. It's not necessarily so, right? You have like evil white stuff and good black stuff, right? I don't like just randomly putting a super negative word as a mechanic or a negative connotation or whatever. So yeah.
And as you mentioned with secret rendezvous and Faldigriffs and wedding rings, it's very awkward with a lot of old cards. Like it's such a broad mechanic where pretty much any deck you are going to play is going to commit a crime at some point because you're going to target an opponent's creature or like target them with a discard spell. Like this is going to happen every game of Magic, that it's just going to come up and be like super weird and awkward flavor wise. And it's especially weird because they're like, I don't know, WotC's so funny. They don't want to do guns in the Old West set. So we've seen like these like magical crossbows and stuff. But at the same time, they're like, yeah, crime mechanic that's going to come up constantly in every game in every format for the rest of the time. I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. But we'll see. I mean, I'm sure the cards will probably be fun and fine. The mechanic itself, though, I'm kind of meh on. There were also some leaks. We're not going to talk about the leaks, but if you want to see a couple of pre-release packs that somehow slipped down the wild, they're over on the main Magic Reddit, r/Magic TCG. So if you want to sneak peek at some of the stuff that we'll be getting spoilers for, I think 2 weeks from now, spoilers start, you can head over to the Reddit and check that out. Anyway, let's what's next on our topic list? Oh, so I wanted to ask you, Richard. I wanted to ask you about the current state of Magic design. So one thing I've realized, actually no, we'll get to that as our last topic. I missed one. We got some news about Moto, Richard. Moto and what sets do and do not come to Moto. What did we hear about that this week?
All right, Fallout. No plans to release Fallout on Magic Online. That's gonna be a problem, Seth. Like, so these sets are legal in Legacy, Vintage, etc. It sounds like they don't have the license for it because it's not like, oh, it's coming. It's like, oh, unknown. This might be a bigger problem when you have a modern legal universes beyond. or maybe some universes beyond directly into standard. But sooner or later, legacy or vintage or pauper or something, we'll get this. Commander is already a lost cause.
Yep.
We we got off of Moto due to missing cards, and it's only gotten worse.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, there's real consequences to being sold off to another company and not cared about, which is they don't negotiate the IP for said product.
It is interesting that I think it might just be WotC being cheap because they also don't have it coming to Arena for for these sets. We didn't get Warhammer, we're not getting Fallout. So it seems like they just aren't willing to like pay up for digital, or maybe there's some, I don't know, other issue that keeps it from happening. But it's certainly sad to see because from everything I've heard, this has nothing to do with Daybreak, like just not being able or willing to program the cards. It's them just not being legally allowed to make these cards on their client. And you really hit on the biggest thing. So Fallout itself, it's going to be like Warhammer, right? There's going to be a couple cards, I'm sure, that'll show up in a legacy deck and people will be disappointed that they can't play it. And it's annoying and it does separate the paper meta from the online meta. All of that's a negative, but the real disaster is going to be when we don't get a modern set. I think that literally kills Magic Online. Like, once modern is not the same on Magic Online as it is in paper, and this could happen as soon as Assassin's Creed. And we know like the Marvel sets are coming, like all these big tentpole Final Fantasy. If those sets don't show up on Magic Online, I think it really is going to kill the client, isn't it? Like, doesn't that just, why play Magic Online? The selling point is you can play these old formats. Once you can't actually play the full old formats, is there even a point?
This is an interesting question. So let's say modern on Moto is different from modern in paper. Who killed whom? Like, where is the majority of modern being played? Do we just be like, well, when you play with Final Fantasy, you're playing some weird modern in paper. The real moderns are Moto because that's where all the, where all the play happens. Like, what do you think about that? Like, do you play modern at FNM? Does that even happen? Like, are we just all playing Commander? Like, is it?
Yeah,
I mean, Moto not the place where modern happens. So if it splits, you would take that one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair point. I'm sure more games of Modern are played on Moto. Well, actually, I'm not sure, but I think more games of Modern are played on Moto than are in paper. At the same time, the biggest events happen in paper, right? When we get a Modern Pro Tour or something like that, it's going to be really awkward if the metagames aren't the same. Like the place where people are playing the most of the games and the most publicized games of a Pro Tour, like not being the same meta. Maybe Wizards is smart enough. Do you think Wizards has the forethought to be like, okay, for modern legal sets at least, we got to get the rights to put it digitally, or no? So that you think there's an actual risk like Assassin's Creed doesn't come to Moto or something?
I think
I'm so nervous about that.
They sold off this product because they don't care about it, and when it's easy, they'll include it. But if they need to go through hoops, they have zero. It's like, what incentive do they have to help out Daybreak or whatever? And I feel the Pro Tour will be like that time where we had the Alchemy Pro Tour or whatever, right? Where we're just like, well, I normally play Standard, but we have this like weird format. So I guess I'm going to practice some Alchemy for the week. And then I'll play Alchemy and then I'll go back. Like, you play pure Modern. And then for the Pro Tour, you slap in some Final Fantasy cards and then go back. But I like even Legacy and Vintage, is it like the majority of that is played online, but when we have things missing from Moto, what is the real format exactly? I'm actually curious. There's precedent for this already.
I mean, I feel like the real format's paper. I feel like just psychologically, that's how people view it, whether they should or shouldn't. I think people are always going to default to paper being real Magic over digital. I think there's good arguments that we shouldn't view it that way because of where the games are played and accessibility and all this stuff. But I think in reality, people are always going to view the paper game as like, canon, and digital is the knockoff or whatever. I will say they also posted a new website 4 days ago, which is, and I'm glad they did this. It's the MTGO set availability list, but it just shows all the sets that are on Moto or partially on Moto. It is concerning to me, though, that that's necessary, because that means theoretically there's going to be a meaningful amount of sets that aren't on Magic Online, because if like almost every set or every set's on Magic Online, you don't need a list, right? You just have a list of Magic sets. So it's a little concerning that they know more sets in the future are not going to be showing up on Magic Online, and that just makes me very nervous about the future of Eternal formats in specific. Like, I think the reaction if like Assassin's Creed doesn't show up on Magic Online would be hugely negative to Magic Online. And if it was like a full-on Lord of the Rings style set like Marvel or Final Fantasy, I think that's like a people selling their collections outrage type thing. Like I don't know. I think it could be a really big deal once a modern set doesn't make it on there.
It has to like why would Wizards sell Moto to Daybreak and then not do this? Is my question, right? Like if they wanted to like have to deal with all of this, they would have just kept it, right? So
Yeah,
I feel probably. What do you think about Lord of the Rings? So Lord of the Rings came. Do you think the
it did.
deal was set already when before Daybreak was handed off the thing and therefore grandfathered in, or do you think they actually went out of their way to get it in there?
I really don't know. I don't know how much of it depends on like the IP holders. Like maybe the Lord of the Rings people are just like, hey, digital, cool, whatever. And maybe like Fallout people or whatever are not as cool with digital, or they'd want way more money or something. Like I wish I could see behind the scenes with these negotiations, because you know it's got to be going on, right? For all these universes beyond sets, you got to like come to some agreement with the people that own these IPs. I wish I could see. My guess is that the Lord of the Rings people just really didn't care and it was super easy to add it to digital. Although maybe it's possible that Wizards knows, like, for a premiere set, we need to have it on Arena, on Magic Online, and in paper. Maybe they are going to, maybe they know that and they'll be forceful with that, but my hopes are not super high, unfortunately.
I mean, I guess what you can do is put the important sets on Moto, and then when you have a Palace Jailer type situation from Fallout cards, make an in-universe version that gets released on Moto. But that seems so much work just for Moto, right? Like people at Wizards be like, well, time to make a new card and new art and just for Magic Online. I wonder if Magic Online is allowed to just make their own cards without the consent of Wizards. Probably not.
I would doubt it. Although that would be an easy solution, right? Because honestly, if you look at Fallout, not so the ideal world is all the cards are on Magic Online and on Magic Arena, that they both get all the cards, because that's a big reason why we moved to paper for Commander Clash, is we just weren't getting all these cards. The meta that we had was looking so much more and more different year by year compared to the paper meta, that was the biggest reason for us switching to playing paper. But I feel like if you look at Fallout, in all honesty, 1, 2, 3 cards might be relevant for Legacy. Like, it's a very small number. So ideally, they'd all be there, but it does seem like it would be reasonable to, like, for 5 cards that matter, print in-universe versions. I don't know if they can do that. I don't know. Wizards has definitely said we're not interested in printing in-universe cards. We have no plans of printing in-universes cards. I even have concerns about that for just, like, paper finance, that we're kind of creating a universes beyond reserve list. If these cards, like, you run out of whatever your contract is, the amount of time that says you can print those cards, and then you aren't going to print in universe cards, you can't reprint the real cards. So I have concerns about the actual setup of those things, but I do think that's the easiest workaround for Moto. Like, if 5 cards from Fallout make it in Legacy, but at the same time, how would you know if those cards would make it in Legacy? Because most of the Legacy is played on Magic Online. So people, that's kind of a chicken egg problem too. But yeah, definitely disappointing to see that Fallout not going to make it, and presumably more sets in the future not going to make it as well. So, oh, one last question, Richard. So here's my last topic I wanted to bring up. So we don't talk about leaks, but if you saw the leaks for Outlaws at Thunder Junction, I think I can say this much without getting anyone mad. There was a card called Holy Cow, and that made me think, Holy Cow, we have an offer you can't refuse. We have silly set themes for multiple, or silly hat themes for multiple of the last sets, silly detective hats, silly cowboy hats. We have all these traditionally silver bordered mechanics, dice rolling, or even squirrels. Mark Rosewater used to talk about how squirrels couldn't be printed in black border because they were too goofy and weird. We're seeing these things all the time. As far as I can tell, we're living in essentially the meme era of Magic card design, like set by set. You could look at a set printed today, and it probably looks like an unset in a lot of ways, or at least a big chunk of cards will look like unset cards with the puns and the jokes. My question for you, Richard, is this a bad thing or a good thing? Like, just the level of memery and the level of puns that we see in Magic design, which is really off the charts compared to 5, 10, 20 years ago. Is this a positive because it's bringing new people in and it's modern and current or something? Or is this a negative because it takes away from the serious aspect of the game, serious fantasy, whatever?
It's probably a positive. I don't know. I feel we're so far from like the serious fantasy. Like every time someone says, "Oh, Universe is Beyond," but my immersion, like they can't be serious, right? Like we had like Strixhaven or whatever. It's like owls and robes or whatever talking or whatever. We had like Battle Bond. It's like a goofy like sports anime happening. Like we've had so many of these sets that take you away from that high fantasy setting that I can't believe that people are actually seriously using that as an argument against Universes Beyond. Um, but I don't know. I think the puns are fine as long as they're funny. Like as long as people enjoy them. Like I know, like I don't know. I don't see an offer you can't refuse and be like, oh no, my game is ruined. I'm just like, I don't know. Okay, the Swan Song, you back or something, right? Like it's just part of the game. I don't see anything bad with it really, or like the One Ring. We see it all the time. We've accepted it as part of Magic lore now, right? We don't really think of Lord of the Rings when we see the One Ring, right? Same with Bowmasters.
Yeah,
Do you actually
I
think of
guess
Lord of the Rings when you see Bowmasters? Because I don't. I'm just like, oh god, it's the same as Fury,
no.
right?
Although if it was like Frodo or Gandalf, it would be a little bit harder to not think of One Ring or not think of Lord of the Rings maybe. So maybe they lucked out with the actual good cards. Although I guess the One Ring's pretty Lord of the Ringsy. But yeah, I guess we do just kind of adopt those things into the Magic universe at this point. I don't know, the meme design, like I don't know. I think it's fine in general, but sometimes I think the jokes like actually aren't that funny or whatever. And I worry if we have too many of them, it takes away from the actual funny ones. Like Colossal Dreadmaw and Stormcrow are pretty like iconic meme cards, but if you're printing 20, 30, 40 of those each set, no one cares about Colossal Dreadmore or Stormcoat because it's just normal now. So I do worry that like you could go too far down this path. And when you try to do the funny, like punny, meme stuff and you miss, or worse yet, you come off like some boomer with a like 15-year-old meme that no one cares about anymore. I think it ends up being a negative instead of a positive when that ends up
You mean
happening.
like all silver bordered sets where I just don't understand how it's funny or why they would make any of this. But I think we're getting there. Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I'm like somewhat offended by the hats. Like I don't know why. Something about
The
the
hat,
cowboy hat. I'm
seriously.
like, there's something wrong with this. I don't know what it is. Like the pop culture puns or whatever don't get me, but like these hats, and I think it's because they feel so low effort. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like there's no reason for you to be wearing this hat. And why are you wearing the hat? And why is that the gimmick? Like it's stupid. But so maybe you're right. Maybe it does matter because it's starting to creep up on me. Like I'm fine with your stupid like 15 squirrels, and I'm fine with an offer you can't refuse. But the cowboy Hananoko is where I draw the line.
Yeah.
It's too
I mean,
much.
I felt like that about the detective hats to some extent. Like it was like if you have a couple, it makes sense. But when like every character has to have a silly detective hat to like show they're a detective, it does just feel a little low effort, right? There's got to be other ways. It feels like it's just always the lowest common denominator. It's like if you go to Wikipedia and you type in like Old West puns, those are going to be all the card titles. Like it's not like there's some great creative reimagining or something. It's just kind of like the lowest common denominator, easiest options, throw a cowboy hat on it, the town ain't big enough for the two of us, boom, print it, magic card, onto the next secret lair drop. So, I mean, I do have concerns about it. The
I mean,
cowboy hats, man.
but people love it. So Fatal Push, the
Yeah,
300
yeah,
kick.
that's true.
When it was like you're already dead. Why
Yeah.
like people eat it up.
If
So
if you look at Reddit during spoiler season, you can get a kind of like a weird glimpse at how popular a card is because people upvote the spoiler cards. And if you do that during spoiler season, yeah, the good cards often get upvoted, but then it's also those cards. It's like, the silly meme cards or some alligator, crocodile, whatever, like Pride of the Hulklad is. Like it's those weird meme cards that catch people's eye. So it does work. Like it's drawing people in. So I guess maybe we're just boomers and got to get on board with the cowboy hats and detective hats and
just
holy
boomers.
cows.
Only angels and demons allowed, and the angels need to be mono white, and the demons need to be mono black. And if it's not, I'm going to riot. I mean, I feel that's more egregious, no? You're like, what is a Celestia angel? And why is this angel Boros? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure. We're exposing
Oh.
our boomerness, Seth. We gotta wrap it up.
Oh, well,
We can
speaking of
join
wrapping
Reed
it up,
Duke. We can join Reed Duke with our written articles on competitive magic. That's what we gotta do. That's what we gotta do.
Well, speaking of wrapping it up, it's about time to wrap up this podcast, but I think we have time for a fish mail, Richard. So let's see if we got a fish mail for this week.
All right. If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get your questions on air. Bicycle. Would a 4-mana planar cleansing be too good or too weak for Modern Horizons 3? Planar cleansing is destroy all non-land permanents at 4 mana in Modern.
It would be fine. I don't think it would be too good.
Really?
Do you think it would be too good?
I think it would be ridiculous.
What deck's going to play it?
Some kind of control deck, some kind of one ring deck that just needs to survive enough and like wipe everything. Well, okay. It doesn't get rid of graveyards. So 4 mana farewell would be disgusting. But this hits everything. So I play a lot of Damn, and Overloaded, it wins games a lot of times, which is basically just a Wrath of God Overloaded. But I have the flexibility to play it as a 2 mana removal. But being able to like on turn 4 clean up all like the Amulet of Vigors and Soul Cauldrons and random miscellaneous crap, I think is very powerful. So you just need the right shell to not die before then.
Okay, maybe you're right, because my first thought was like, do I even really care that much about blowing up all the non-lands compared to just blowing up creatures? But I guess there are situations and matchups where that's going to matter. Getting rid of the, Sigarda's Aids and Hammers and Soul Cauldrons and Amulets. So maybe 4 mana would be too aggressive. What about 5 mana? It's gotta be like, it's not gonna be OP at 5, is it? Unplayable at 5, too good at 4?
I would say, well, I don't know if it's too good, but it would definitely be played a lot.
It would be played
because you have the One Ring. So all you gotta do is like counterspell, One Ring, and then just like chain together planar cleansings now that you have the One Ring online, and your One Ring lives through it, by the way. So you're cool, right?
That's
so
true.
Like people play Supreme Verdict, like non-ironically, play Supreme Verdict, right? In Azorius based control decks. So I think this is just strict upgrade. So it will see play, and I think it will be very strong if it.
I mean, I guess there's a downside that you might blow up your Teferi or something, but I guess in reality, or your Leyline Binding or something, but in reality, that probably you can build around it easy enough.
The One Ring fixes everything.
Maybe it'd be too good.
Just keep.
The One Ring's gonna get banned. That's one thing oh boy, after playing this Moto Masters event last week, every match was a One Ring match. Every match involved multiple One Rings. Every match went like 40 minutes. It was partly because I was playing Mono White Martyr, which is just like the grindiest deck in existence. So that was maybe part of it too. But I think the One Ring is it's still kind of warping the meta. I feel like that card still is on the watch list for possible future action.
It's the new Blood Moon. You take any like tier 4 deck, you slap 4 One Rings in it, and now your deck is like tier 2, and you can go head to head, and you can like handily win games where the other deck is not ready for the One Ring. But like strictly saying, like all the top decks do not play the One Ring, right? Like Rhino does not play the One Ring. Yawgmoth does not play the One Ring. So if you play the One Ring, you're too slow, and you'll just dunk on the other slow decks. But the top decks do not play it.
Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our podcast for today. Richard, if people want to send in fish mail for next episode, how do they do that?
All right, hit us up on X, Twitter, @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail. Boy, are we ever gonna call it X? Is anyone ever gonna?
No, I don't think anyone calls it X. No, it's still.
Do we have to call it X, formerly known as Twitter, for the rest of our lives? Is that what we got to do?
I feel like Elon's gonna change it back at some point. If everyone just still calls it Twitter, at some point you just got to go back, right?
No, if it's still alive in 5 years and we call it Twitter, then people are gonna call us boomers still. They're like, you mean X? You're like, I remember when it was called Twitter.
It's probably true. Anyway, that brings us to the end of episode 475 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Richard for hanging out. Thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And we'll be back next week to talk about whatever goes on in the world of Magic. So until then, have a spectacular week, everyone. And this is the crew signing out.